Alright, I figured I was like, I'm not going to do a video, and I'm like, I'll do a video. So just a reminder of all of the good stuff that is due next week. So you have the procedural texturing assignment. It's basically the second weekly assignment. So it's effectively, if you guys have looked at the in-class assignment, which I just looked over shortly, it's basically just a more complex version of that. I've linked the recorded lectures again here. But basically you're going to model your own object, UV your own object, and then you're going to texture it procedurally. Things to keep in mind with the model is it should have a good variety of curves and raised and lowered areas, that kind of thing. Think of the different ways, like in the example I did like a mushroom, and that had like lots of sort of smooth curves in it, compared to the other little shader ball thing that I made with kind of lots of like hard creases. You want like a nice combination of both in your object. So stuff like fire hydrants or robots are really good. Axes or other random wooden tools like mallets are cool. You can do a thing with fruit that's rotting or moldy. I might do just like a quick weird video on that. I'd say probably stick with something metal or something like that. It's going to be a little bit easier just to figure out what you're doing. The fruit's a little bit vague. Something that would be not great to model is a spoon, because there's just like not really enough to do with a spoon, honestly. Or something like a cup or a mug. There's just, again, not really enough detail. It's going to be really hard to actually make those procedural textures show up. And then you're going to procedurally texture whatever object you made. You should have at least 3 separate shaders used in your final procedural shader. So in the case of the example, for Arnold, I had like a red paint layer, a gold base, and a dirt layer. And all of those were combined via numerous mix shaders into a final shader. But I want those 3 base colors, so like the red paint, the gold, and the dirt. You need at least that many shaders. I recommend if you're, the paint, metal, and dirt is just sort of like 3 easy things to go with if you're confused about that. And then you can also use, if you want to use extra stuff like scratch marks or anything like that to enhance your procedural textures, you are welcome to do that. But most of the wear and grime should be done procedurally with things like curvature nodes, ambient occlusion, or dust, stuff like that. So the scratch marks are really just sort of like extra. But again, you should be playing with the curvature nodes and that kind of thing. I don't know. This is a great assignment for grime, honestly. It's really delightful. I do kind of expect you to go through and like break up the edges with noise maps. So it's not something required for the weekly assignment, but I really want you guys to push yourself, because I think procedural texturing is like insanely powerful. It can be a huge time saver. So I just want you guys to be aware that you can do this stuff, and that if you never do it again after this week, I don't care. But I do want you guys to play with it. And again, it's sort of fancy version of the class assignment. So, what to submit? Basically, I would like your Maya project folder with your MA file in it, named thusly. And if you've used any kind of texture scratches, whatever, throw those in as well. Include any reference images that you used, and if I find like 8 versions of your file or like a bunch of weird extra textures in there, I'm going to take points off your project. I also do want renders of your stuff. These should go in the images folder of your project folder. So I want 3 renders of your final object. Again, make them look nice. They should have backgrounds and decent lighting, that kind of thing. Make sure it's bright enough to see, there's no crazy aggressive shadows, that kind of stuff. And again, just throw that in the images folder. Naming convention, etc. And then I want 1 render of each of the base textures you used for your individual shader. So that would be like I just want the red paint on the whole object, render that out, put the gold on, render that out, and then add the grime, render that out. So it shouldn't be fancy, it should just be 1 shader on the object. I just want to see what the shaders look like in case it's like hard to see from your procedural texturing. So hopefully that makes sense. Those should also be in your images folder. And I would like everything, just submit me 1 zip folder, basically with your project folder and all the stuff just in your project folder setup. How this is graded, I feel like fairly self-explanatory. Lower grades is going to be you just didn't meet the requirements, like you didn't have enough textures, you didn't actually do anything procedural, that kind of stuff. You meet the minimum requirements for middle of the road. Maybe some of the base textures could use some refinement, how they were applied to the object could use some refinement. Higher grades are going to be for stuff like you know, you have nice looking base textures, you've gone through and refined how the scratches sit, like noise textures, things like that. It just generally looks sort of more natural and a little bit, like, nicer, more refined. How many times can I say refined? Haha. And this is also something where, again, I start taking into account, you know, how nice your lighting is, if you did really interesting dynamic things with your render angles, that kind of stuff. So that is the procedural texturing assignment. What the heck else? Let's just go over the in-class exercise for week 2. Watch the whole playlist. It is probably one of the longer ones you guys are going to have. So if it's kind of a drag to get through, most of the other ones probably aren't going to be that long. I do give a lot of like weird good tips in there, just sort of randomly. I have no idea where they are, so to actually get that content, you do need to watch it. And then if you guys are interested, I terminated the edge loops on the sphere. It's like a 30-minute video because I just sat down and started doing it with no plan, so I don't know, you can watch that if you're interested or wanted maybe like a more in-depth tutorial on that. If you wanted, it's there. For the in-class exercise, basically all you're going to do is a simple version of the other assignment I just went over. It's basically recreating what I did in the textured playlist thing. So you're just going to have, again, some kind of metal base. You're going to make a colored paint, and then you are going to add some wear on the edges of that show paint. I pretty much, like, basically if you follow along with what I did in this playlist, you will have completed this assignment. So basically just want, again, like, metal with paint over top. You should have some scratches showing through the paint, just sort of all over your model, and then go through and like chip the paint away from the edges, any hard edges on your model, add some grime in, and then make the thing dusty. The dust, I still have not been able to find a good way to do this in Redshift. So dust is only if you're using Arnold. If you're doing Redshift, you can ignore this. And like I said, I don't care if you don't want to do all the noise texture breaking stuff up like I did in class, that's fine. I do expect that for the assignment, but not necessarily for this. And I would like you to just do this on the little smoothing ball thing from last week, as well as this model, which I have linked on Drive. It is basically just a version of my head. As an interesting hint, tip, side note, whatever, you might consider Boolean, you might need to smooth the model first, but you might need to Boolean union these together and see how that affects procedural textures. They will look different depending on whether or not you have Boolean your model. And incidentally, I don't recommend Booleaning, but for something like this, just whatever. You're not really using this, just like a weird demo object, so it doesn't really matter. What to submit? My file with all of your textures in it. I don't want your project folder. If I need my own scratches, I'll put those in. And then just... Goody, tornado time. And then just throw in one render of both of the objects in the scene together, pretty much like what I was doing for the demo. Use a skydome light. If you're in Redshift, go in and throw in like an HDRI into a skydome light. I'm sorry, this should say use a skydome light with HDRI for Redshift and a physical sky for Arnold. Clarifying. If you've already submitted this, I'm going to not pay attention to this, but I haven't seen anyone submit this yet. So, anywho. And then put a ground plane in, make sure, again, you can't see off nearby, avoid that kind of stuff. So that's the in-class exercise. Next week we'll be going over ZBrush and all of that good stuff, which actually reminds me I should send out the email for ZBrush trials and such. Let's see, so reaction crit is basically just, you know, react to the crit people gave you in class, and then the feedback that I left. This week I did video tutorials on stuff. Or sorry, not video tutorials. I left video feedback on pen assignments, so do watch those. I just sort of like went through the model and, you know, pointed out stuff as I found, whatever. React to both of those, student crit and my crit. That's due at midnight tonight. And then the only other thing that's due, the in-class, by the way, is due at the end of class. I'm sorry, that's not due at the end of class. That is due at midnight. Sorry. So, midnight of week 2, the in-class of week 2 is due. Same thing for reaction crit. These two are due next week. Good lord. When in doubt, check your calendar and learn, or whatever deadline is assigned to the assignment itself. Anywho, only other thing left is the digital floor plan, and I may or may not mock up some kind of fake scene depending on how much time I have, but basically you're going to take the sketches that you did last week and convert them into a, rough digital floor plan. So this is going to be basically model everything in your room to scale. I don't need a bunch of measurements on stuff, but, if I throw a 6-foot-tall human model in, it should fit in the room appropriately. That's actually how I scale test a lot of scale stuff. And basically what you're shooting for is just like a rough layout of, your furniture. If you have a desk in a corner, put in something for the desk. I would suggest, if it's a desk, make it kind of look like a desk. Don't just use a huge cube. Put, a cube for, each leg of the desk or whatever. If it's like a set of drawers with a plank of wood over top, put in 2 cubes with a big rectangle over top. Kind of make it desk shaped, so if someone was looking at it, they could kind of tell, oh, this is a desk. That kind of stuff. So it doesn't need to be crazy detailed. It doesn't have to have great topology. Clipping cubes is fine. It's really just to get an idea of, if I were in this space digitally, what does it feel like? Do I need more things in the scene? Do I need to rearrange anything? Reminder again, this is not a team assignment. Everyone is doing their own versions of this. They should all look different. And presumably, you will have more objects than just the 3 objects and then the ones that you get from your teammates. So everyone should have different looking spaces with different looking background objects in those. You're not really sharing those, with the exception of maybe if it's something really generic, like I've made a wine glass, or something like that. You could share that, even if that wasn't one of your main 3 objects. But if it's something like, I've made an extra dresser, that's kind of that's your own dresser, because again, everyone's supposed to be doing their own sort of secondary objects for that. You do have a little bit longer to work on the environment objects, since there's more of them, obviously. And for this, so one image is just going to include really basic measurements of stuff. It doesn't need to be down to the millimeter. I don't care if you do it in Maya. You could screenshot your screen and doodle this in Photoshop or something. That's fine. And then just a weird thing, just take that same screenshot or image and just circle all the objects that your teammates are doing. I just want to know, where that stuff kind of is in your scene, and how much stuff your teammates are making compared to what you're planning on making. And if there's any extra clutter objects in your scene, throw that in as well. If you have books or something like that on the floor, or boxes of nails or something. They don't need to be fancy nails on a desk. Could just be cool, I made a cylinder and I duplicated it a few times and I rotated it randomly and there are my desk nails. And again, model to scale. I would recommend throw in some really rough, I wouldn't recommend, I'm requiring that you throw in some very, very rough lighting for at least the major sources of light in your scene. This is going to be stuff, presumably a window. And I'm assuming you can do either day or night. You don't need to do both. If you want to, probably good, but again, I'm only requiring one. So this would be stuff again, light coming through a window. If it's a night scene, the lamps, major lamps, that kind of thing. A fireplace, if you have a fireplace that you're planning on lighting, I will go over some fire sim-y stuff later. It's not too bad to do. But, maybe throw some stuff in there for that. Space requirements, again, just 1 window, 1 door. Recommend it fits in a 10 by 12 space, but not requiring it. And I actually recommend that your space isn't square. Potentially it'll just be a little bit more interesting to watch. So again, expectations are sort of things that are a little bit detailed and not just giant cubes. If you have a lamp, don't just make a giant cylinder lamp. Put a big cylinder for a shade and then a little cylinder for the inside. I don't need the bulb, and it literally can just be cylinders clipping through each other, but it is nice to just, have it be vaguely lamp-shaped. Same thing with, the dresser. Maybe throw in some crappy doors. This is not designed to be a super labor-intensive assignment. It should hopefully be fairly quick. But, yeah. And again, so theoretically, some extra clutter. I kind of mentioned that already. So what to submit for this is 4 renders of the space from in the room. This is proofing for the final renders are due once the scene is complete for the actual final. And when I say in the room, I want to see, ceiling, all that stuff. If I can see out your window or your door, that's fine. But I do want to see, ceilings, floors. Don't just do the big thing where you sort of zoom out and show me your whole scene over a Maya void. That's gross looking. And again, that one sort of render or screen cap of the room with rough dimensions. and then the one circling objects from your teammates. If you could also submit a Maya file with your floor plan in it, that would be lovely. And by lovely, I also mean required again. And please actually do not zip any of this. I do not want any of this zipped together. Just input all of these things individually, and that should be fine. So for this, it's not a huge point assignment. So middle of the road is going to be kind of, you've met all the technical requirements. It's obvious what the room probably is, but maybe there's, not quite enough detail, you've blocked in the desk reasonably, but, the other dresser is just, a big cube. Or, just, stuff isn't quite finished, but it's, getting to finished. Lower grades are going to be, stuff isn't finished, you haven't included what I've, all the stuff here for, what to submit, you haven't done some of that. Or the space just looks really empty. And by that I mean, theoretically you might not have put in all the objects that you were supposed to from, yourself or your teammates, etc., etc. Or it's literally just, a giant empty room with a desk in a corner, something like that. Higher grades, it's going to be obvious what the space probably is, so a bar is going to be recognizable as a bar versus a, office gaming room or something like that. There's you don't need to go crazy with the secondary objects, but, that would be an example, if you're doing a bar or something like that, you put in, something for stools. They don't need to be fancy, but just cubes on sticks or something like that. You throw those in if it's an office, if you're doing, a fish tank or something. Throw that in, maybe, there's posters or pictures on the wall, just, throw in some planes for that. And then also looking for this, the camera angles are kind of interesting, or as interesting as they can be with cubes everywhere. So, that's pretty much that. Next week you will be doing the sort of room bones and, fully modeling the outside of your room. So be aware of that. If you design your room in a good way that you can keep working from it, you can actually reuse a lot of the stuff for, the walls, as you go forward. Also, a reminder that the hero model is due in 2 weeks. So the hero model is one of your 3 main models. The only real difference, the hero object is graded exactly the same as your decorative and furniture objects. The only difference is that, one, you'll be making this one first. Theoretically, it's supposed to be the most complex of all of your objects. Realistically, if you want to swap this to something, if you feel very, very strongly about your furniture object, or that's by far the most complex, you can do that for your hero object. I kind of don't care. Like I said, they're all graded the same. Literally the only difference, apart from this one being completed first, is this one is going to have a turntable rendered of it. So, basically, whichever object you think is going to be the most suitable for a turntable, in terms of being used as a portfolio piece, do that one for your main object. Of course, you can render turntables for your other ones if you want. I'm just not requiring it. But that will be due in 2 weeks. And that's basically, kind of the same specs as the pen. So you'll be expected to have all of the details in for that for the model. It should be, if you're animation people, you should be working with smooth modeling. So all your objects should be smoothable. If not, if you're, game concentration or VR and you want to do low poly, let me know. I can give you some more information about that. But yeah, so again, I'm kind of expecting all of the stuff for that to be done. And then if you scroll down, if you want to see the requirements for the hero objects, that's all down here under just hero object models. And this is, again, I've sort of tagged this, this is all of the main objects, so you can see they are being graded the same way. So this is modeling the whole thing, and the reason I'm giving you notice 2 weeks in advance is you still have a weekly assignment next week. So I'd recommend, if you have time, working on it now. Otherwise, next week might be a little bit overwhelming. You'll have a weekly assignment, a full modeling assignment, and then another, not huge but not inconsequential modeling assignment finishing your room layout, basically. So again, these should all be kind of modeled to scale. Consider UVing stuff, not requiring it. My general rule is if something comes apart or if it's made of different materials, model them separately, because usually if a metal piece is attached to a plastic piece, it's held on by glue. It's not somehow manufactured with metal on plastic, because that's how would that even be done? No, sorry, UVing object is totally due. And then basically put your object in your little scene and render. So by next week you'll have both a block in, which you're doing this week, and you will also have a, by the time this is due, you will have a full finished bare bones, like the walls, the floors should all be finished in the room. So you can put that in there, render it in there, all that good stuff. I'll go over this again later. It's also here, but yeah, so that is the thing. Due in 2 weeks. So that's all you guys have to do. Stuff due at midnight tonight, digital floor plan procedural due next week, and then this is due in 2 weeks. So, yep.